Real quick, just before we kick off the second half of the Oregon Wine Board presentation, which will be led by three of my colleagues. I think they're on their way up right now. But one of the things that was just touched on real briefly is this interdependence and interreliance that our two statewide organizations have, the Wine Growers Association and the Oregon Wine Board, and there's no more better and more vivid demonstration of the value that that brings than what Senator Wyden said himself in an industry meeting several years ago. He said Oregon is, the wine industry is Oregon's relentlessly good news story. Now, he didn't know how hard it is to make a buck in this industry, but he sees all the same data we see, the same stuff that Rob McMillan shared, showing how Oregon, a small region, is the envy of so many other regions, and that is the testament to the effort and the insights and the ingenuity of the people in this room. But that interdependence of the OWA and the OWB pivots off of Wyden's comment, and we saw it so vividly in House Bill 5006 a few years ago. You've heard us mention many times that it's our job to go out and find supplemental income sources to add and multiply and further leverage the tax money that you give us and that we're entrusted with. That is, as you've heard today, about $1 million this year. One of the critical parts of House Bill 5006 was the first ever infusion of state legislative money, $500,000, to fund continued growth of the Oregon wine industry. That money came through the Wine Board thanks to the OWA's lobbying, and it has benefited every single one of the four corners of our mandate to the industry: media relations, marketing, research, and education. That is just about as good an example, and our colleagues in Washington and California were so envious the way the two organizations worked on behalf of the industry. We're going to turn it over now to three of my Oregon Wine Board colleagues, Marie Chambers, Kai McMurtry, and Sally Murdoch, to go a little bit deeper than we had time to today on the marketing and the communications programs that not only address your business needs today, but give you a look at the way the strategic plan we talked about this morning will start to play out in new thinking and new ideas. So I'll turn it over to Kai McMurtry, who directs all of our consumer marketing, who will in turn give it to Marie and Sally.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for having me. Good afternoon. My name's Kai. As Tom just mentioned, I manage consumer relations for the Oregon Wine Board, and I'm going to pick up on the marketing and communications work that Jess and Tom touched on this morning. I have several critical points to make, so I will thank you in advance for enduring my script here. As a tiny sliver of the large wine world, Oregon must be smart and consistent in messaging and promotion. With constrained resources, we must be extremely disciplined about what efforts will reap the greatest rewards. Throughout 2019, the OWB marketing leadership, as you heard this morning, asked, what work best suited to the OWB should we focus on to address the industry's most pressing needs? The industry answered with these four clear priorities. They will inform our work in the coming years. And in possibly the loudest chorus of all, you asked that we prioritize defining, promoting, and protecting the nearly 60 years of equity built into the Oregon wine brand. This area, Oregon's brand equity, is fundamental to the reputation stewardship that was introduced this morning, and it's key to supporting your work at the association and business level. So over the next 30 minutes or so, you will hear from several of us about what's ahead in each of these critical areas, but I'm going to begin with Oregon's brand power, the new consumer-focused work underway this year, and the tools available year-round to promote your piece of the Oregon wine brand. So let's start with a big question. What defines Oregon's reputation? How would one distill this image into a visual language that connects emotionally with consumers around the world? No doubt it's a big task, but we're up for it. Oregon's reputation is, of course, defined by people, by the thousands of women and men in the vineyards and cellars around the state, the customer teams in the tasting rooms, the sales staff on the road. But it's also these grapes, of course, the soils they grow in, the vines and vineyards they come from. Oregon's reputation includes this stand of trees and the slopes of the Willamette Valley where it grows, the winds of the Columbia Gorge, the valleys around Roseburg, and all the tasting rooms, restaurants, kitchens, and patches of dirt where an Oregon experience became an Oregonian memory. This hospitality is Oregon. This expertise is Oregon. This focus is Oregon. And of course, this community is Oregon. The equity you have built into Oregon's reputation is the collection of half a century of product, people, place, and purpose. It is the emotional currency that connects consumers to our humble region, and it's the best way we have to build champions of Oregon wine. In 2020, the Oregon Wine Board will build a modern and comprehensive Oregon wine identity to amplify the collective brand and enhance the reputation of Oregon wine globally. You have identified this pressing priority, and we will deliver on it. If this is sounding a bit too abstract, let's turn strategy into tactics, and we'll build a brand together in the form of a website. So our brand identity will need a logo and a color palette, strong visual elements that convey personality without using words. Our brand will need to define the style and tone of graphics and foreground elements like headlines and photography so that, for example, the Oregon Wine Touring Guide and our booth at Provine come from the same visual family. A holistic brand identity will also clarify how we write and speak about Oregon, and even how we structure that information. We share values by the points we highlight and the information pathways we invite consumers down. Hopefully you recognize this webpage as our current consumer website. While it contains thoughtful work, it does not project the personality of the Oregon wine brand as well as it could. Next year, when our new Oregon identity is complete, it will be incorporated into all appropriate programs and assets, from websites to Oregon Wine Month to international tastings, so that all consumer touches are consistent and reinforce the reputation that you have built. I hope this gives you a sense of the scope and scale of this project. It is not simply a logo and a tagline. It is not simply a website redesign. It is a way for us to connect emotionally with Oregon wine drinkers by creatively communicating Oregon's unique reputation, and it is exactly the type of program that the Oregon Wine Board is best suited for. This work is hard, and it's gonna take some time. So while we're doing that, it's hard. The script doesn't always work. The work is hard, and it's worth doing right, so it's gonna take some time. Next week, the OWB will apply for a Travel Oregon grant to match your tax dollars in funding this initiative. We're optimistic our application will be rewarded in April, and by May of this year, we will be at work. At the same time, we'll be meeting with regional association boards to ensure the unique voice of each is understood and captured. And by this time next year, the OWB will share with you the complete identity, and consumers around the world will see this new work as OregonWine.org in 2021, and of course, much more will follow. As one of your peers shared in response to a survey, the Oregon Wine Board should promote the brand of Oregon wine, but we should do our individual selling. So while brand development work goes on behind the scenes, let me touch on a few of the tools that are available now to address your needs and share your regional stories. The printed Oregon Wine Touring Guide remains available to businesses in Oregon and consumers around the country and is always free of charge. They are, in fact, available right now in the lobby. I encourage you to pick up a case on your way out. Everyone that you don't take home, I have to load into the car. The digital version of the guide was just refreshed following our fall data collection and released last week with updated maps and listings. The trade-facing Oregon Wine Resource Studio is a comprehensive education platform covering history, regions, soil, the business case for Oregon wine, and more. Presentations are free to download and can be customized for staff or distributor tasting. Both these resources build on Oregon's statewide reputation while sharing regional perspectives, and both will adopt our new identity when ready. The Oregon Wines Fly Free program continues to offer a strong incentive to tasting room sales that's region and variety inclusive while sending your guests home with wine to share. And our next Oregon Wine Trail events take place this spring in San Francisco and Seattle. These tastings leverage grant dollars to build Oregon's reputation in important markets for both expansion and tourism. Once complete, this 4-event series will have further trial and awareness for more than 2,500 consumers and trade professionals. Research and anecdote, as you know, confirm those who drink Oregon wine at home are more likely to come visit us, and those who come visit us are more likely to return home and be regular Oregon wine drinkers. These programs seek to address both by providing a tangible touch point with Oregon. The 9th annual Oregon Wine Month is right around the corner in May. We're accepting orders now for free POS for tasting rooms and distributors, and we'll host a webinar on February 20th to cover program details. Next May in 2021, Oregon Wine Month will be one of our first programs to utilize that new brand identity that I opened with. Also energized with our new identity, the OWB will further activate our more than 70,000 newsletter and social subscribers who have raised their hand in asking to hear more about Oregon wine. To learn more about these programs and all Oregon Wine Board programs, visit our industry website, or even better, please come see us, as you've heard repeatedly, in the lobby during the next trade show break. I promise in that setting I can have conversations where I improvise words rather than read them. I look forward to joining you all again here next year to show you, rather than tell you, the exciting brand work the OWB will champion to enhance the reputation of your Oregon wine globally. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marie Chambers, and I will be introducing you to our market expansion strategy. So you've seen this slide already a couple times today, and I'm only showing it to you because I want to build on it. You can clearly see that Oregon's wine production is 0.15% of global production. Now, if you make the assumption that that figure equates to our market share from a sales perspective, and consider that less than 5% of Oregon wine sales are outside of the country, now we're talking about a global market share of 0.005%. That number seems so small, it's probably not even worth mentioning, but I want to show you this. This is a map that shows more than 60 countries where Oregon wine can be found outside of the United States. That 0.005% of Oregon wine has an amazing global reach for such a small amount. So you have to ask, how is this possible? What does it take to make a sommelier in Mexico or Indonesia or a fine wine retailer in Iceland want to add an Oregon wine to their list? From the Oregon Wine Board's perspective, we see that a few things have to come together to make this possible, and a few of them are happening in this picture. First are the wineries, who invest their own funds and years in building relationships with key trade influencers, and you can see a couple winery owners doing just that in this picture. Second is confirmation of the business case for selling Oregon wine. We know from our studies that the margin potential on selling one bottle of high-quality Oregon wine is far greater than any other U.S. wine region. And as you saw this morning from Rob, that our Oregon wine sales are one of the few regions in the world that actually are showing sales growth at the moment. So it just makes clear business sense to carry Oregon wine brands. And the third factor we think is unique to Oregon at the moment is heart. And this concept clearly connects to the branding work that Kai introduced just a bit ago. There is something special about Oregon, and everybody recognizes it throughout the world. So this is a picture of a group of about 20 influential wine buyers we brought to Oregon last year for 6 days of master classes, winery tours, and tastings. We bring a group of people like this to Oregon every year, and they primarily represent importers and on and off-premise establishments. And they look like they're having a great time, right? They're ending their trip with a unique dining experience at the Joel Palmer House. So this group of people, they probably first learned about Oregon wine through a seminar or WSET course, or maybe a tasting in their home market. Their interest grew from that first touch point, culminating in their first visit to Oregon wine country. And then after a moment like this, they leave us as enthusiastic, lifelong fans working hard to sell every bottle of Oregon wine that they can get their hands on. These are the kind of people who, like a sommelier in Sweden that I met a couple years ago, loves Oregon wine so much that he actually had the brand of an Oregon winery tattooed onto his arm. So these are the lifelong fans that we want to create when we do our market expansion work. So whatever their first touch point was with Oregon wine, it initiated an intense interest for a connection and for learning more. And this is where the Oregon Wine Board sees the most potential for our activities. If we are able to create programming that capitalizes on the enthusiasm and passion generated by our industry, for our industry, we will be able to leverage the attraction to brand Oregon wine, pair that enthusiasm with the clear business case and margin potential with carrying Oregon wine brands. And by pairing those two pieces together, we'll be able to build a groundswell of sales opportunities for individual brands. So in other words, our market expansion strategy is to build multi-tiered trade demand for Oregon wine in markets outside of Oregon in order to generate sales growth opportunities for Oregon brands. So what does this look like? In this past year, we ramped up our trade education effort and saw some very positive results. We continue to build onto and refine the content in the Oregon Wine Resource Studio and introduced an online active learning experience called Learn Oregon, which generated more than 2,000 trade signups. By the end of June, we will have hosted more than 12 in-depth masterclasses in more than 10 domestic and international markets. And next week, we are launching the Northwest Wine Certification Program, which is a 2-level certification we built in partnership with Washington, with the goal of driving adoption of the program by wine schools in international markets. We are also hosting 2 domestic Oregon Wine Trail tasting events, as well as many international tasting opportunities and inbound tours. Our experience with these education and tasting activities have yielded the highest level of trade engagement in our history, with positive results. We have learned from trade that after attending one of our seminars, they are more interested in adding Oregon wine brands and likely to increase sales of Oregon wine. So looking ahead to our primary activities, we will focus on expanding and enhancing our digital learning assets. We plan to develop Learn Oregon into a more robust online learning platform that can be promoted and utilized year-round. We will also enhance the Resource Studio by adding education content that reinforces the profit margin potential and the business case for selling Oregon wine. We will look to strengthen our partnerships with domestic trade education organizations such as TechSom and GuildSom to continue to drive in-depth awareness and appreciation. And finally, we will continue to host trade tasting opportunities in international markets and inbound tours in order to create direct opportunities for wineries to expand their sales and access new markets. It's an exciting and important challenge to build on the momentum our statewide brand has established outside of the state of Oregon, one that our market expansion team with Christina Dierment, Bree Stock, Margaret Bray, and myself are eager to tackle. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Sally Murdoch to present our communications plan.
In the Columbia Gorge, a rider strolled to half a dozen tasting rooms in a matter of minutes and was so impressed with how easy it was, featured several Hood River wineries in a national travel site, 52 Perfect Days. A health magazine tempts readers with, quote, "Our amazing travel writer visits Oregon and enjoys vegan cuisine and exercise among vineyards and gorgeous landscape. Plan your vacation here and don't miss out on the healthy and fun activities that Oregon has in store," end quote. Forbes magazine proclaimed, "Like the Umpqua Valley, the Rogue Valley is potentially a world-class wine region whose vinous evolution is just starting. There's plenty here to tempt the curious palate. Time to jump in and investigate." These are all examples from stories resulting from media tours this past year. What made these stories sing is that when brought to the writers, the stories were so well known by the wineries and the regions that they translated perfectly in the final outcome. The 2019 listening tour echoed what we've heard for years: bring us more media opportunities. And the better you know your story, what makes your winery and region different, the better we can package it, tie it with a bow, and hand it off to a writer who tells your story to millions. The communications department serves as a hub for hundreds of journalists, for wineries, and inspiration for story ideas. Your stories are told to journalists and dozens of destination marketing folks who help drive people here to experience Oregon. We see more and more writers taking the information and data that we send them and dropping them into stories. In September, Portland Monthly proclaimed, "Oregon wine is dominating the world." Where'd this come from? Well, at least in part, it came from this little book that serves as a media kit. It's got maps, stats, figures. It's also a pad to write in for reporters. It's a giveaway and it's a story maker, and I have about 100 copies at our booth in the lobby if you'd like to see it yourself. Oregon wine continues to be on an upward trajectory with media interest. The amount of articles mentioning Oregon wine is up almost 32% this year over the last. The word on Oregon wine continues to get out. So how does our office reach out and grab journalists to write about Oregon wine even when they've never been here? We employ a number of tactics through storytelling, both inbound and outbound media outreach. Inbound media outreach is bringing journalists to us to experience Oregon in person. Media tours, one-off visits to vineyards and wineries, and tastings with critics are just a few of the ways we support market expansion. Sometimes I have influence over the journalists and can take them to places to write about in varieties, and sometimes not, especially when they pay their own way. Once media visit us, they're often under different editorial constraints. Some turn their stories around in a week, some take a year. It's about thoroughness in reporting and their own editorial deadlines. Similarly, we go outside Oregon to deliver stories. Events such as the Oregon Wine Trail allow us to visit writers in their towns, and desk-side visits allow us to go to their offices, which we're doing in San Francisco and Seattle. Sampling wines, pitches, press releases are also methods we use to grab their attention. Sometimes we'll even hand off messages to groups like Travel Oregon when they're going to visit writers in New York and they talk up Oregon wine. 20 unique articles came out from 2 media tours this year. When we get magazines outside the wine sphere, we touch new audience segments in fitness, health, mainstream, food, travel, and more. Keep in mind, these are articles that would have never happened had we not brought journalists here and you telling them your stories. Our relationship with Travel Oregon netted production of this film, the #1 rated wine show on Amazon Prime called Vias for Vino. This Oregon episode spans Portland, the Willamette Valley, and the Gorge, and in its first month, which was December, had 30,000 new viewers. This paid opportunity features the Lang family, and here's a sneak peek. Roll video.
Whether you're a nature lover or a city slicker, Oregon's got you covered. We'll start our journey in the Willamette Valley, learning about Oregon's commitment to responsible farming and why Pinot Noir grows so well here. We'll hang out with the Lang family of Lang Estate before going fishing with their son Jesse on the Columbia River. Then we're off to downtown Portland to peruse this young, creative city that's so close to wine country. And I'll try my hand at a bit of art, never my strong suit. We'll get dirty on today's Nerd Lab about soil and end up cooking a killer meal to pair with our wines at the local Portland staple Ned Ludd. Have it all on this episode of V is for Vino. Let's watch, learn, and drink.
Welcome to season 2.
New for 2020. In August, 170 riders will descend on Eugene, and OWB will be there to help provide them with 6 excursions to different regions across the state. One of the most important points in supporting this is regionally, the riders who have never been here will get a balanced view of winemaking in the state, as we are literally bringing them to the Gorge, the Rogue Valley, the Umpqua Valley, Elkton, Oregon, and the Willamette Valley, where the conference is centered. Also new for 2020. This is Siobhan Ball, and she's the founder of Dirty Radish Travel Company, which connects travelers to her favorite places in Oregon and France for world-class hospitality and wine education. A native to the Pacific Northwest, Siobhan is a certified sommelier and French wine scholar with more than 20 years' experience in the hospitality industry. She's worked in some of the most well-respected and dynamic teams in the Portland culinary landscape, including Tournant, Park Kitchen, Little Bird Bistro, and the acclaimed Le Pigeon. We know your tasting room staff wants to connect with visitors. And later this spring, Siobhan will help deliver a program alongside certifications addressing inclusive hospitality with OWB Education and Communications departments to make sure everyone feels welcome at tasting rooms, free from implicit biases and microaggressions. This more inclusive and welcoming environment will help your DTC sales and support market expansion and will be communicated through demonstrations of positive hospitality, Siobhan's own stories, and stay tuned for more. We'll also work closely with Travel Oregon, as we did this past year. Tonight, we're having a dinner with biodynamic winemakers and press. In May, we're going to both underwrite an Eastern Oregon section of our cross-border AVA tour to Walla Walla and Milton Freewater. In July, we're bringing a Canadian wine journalist to IPNC, and we'll take a mini excursion to the Columbia Gorge as well. And then in August, we'll work together on beefing up excursions for the journalists in Eugene for the Wine Media Conference, which I just mentioned. As well as beefing up media outreach, the Information Sharing Task Force, the ISTF, will be enhanced this year as well. What began as an annual meeting has transformed into 45 members coming together in a responsive and engaging forum for winemakers and regions sharing info. We also have a guest journalist at each meeting to talk about stories they're looking for and ways for winemakers to shine. As just mentioned this morning, there's now 19 AVAs to sew together a lot of information, and OWB's leadership in having all 45 members talking is critical to collaboration across the state. In the spirit of better communication and integrating insights, these 45 members are tasked with providing regions with media opportunities and more news. If you're an active AVA member able to share the info with your region, please consider joining us by emailing me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.